I'd like to preface this by saying that I live a pretty quote-unquote straight-edge lifestyle, so I'm certain that what I saw and heard last New Year's Eve wasn't the result of some hallucination or drunken stupor, but was 100% real. I live on the outskirts of your stereotypical small southern town, so a few of my friends live out further into the boondocks that are only accessible by those dark country back roads. One of my friends, Darren, lives with his family in one of the richer neighborhoods in the area that can only be reached by these back roads. Every year his family throws a party at their house on New Year's Eve where all the family's friends are invited, myself included. It's a pretty fun occasion, so I'm always excited when I get the formal invitation from Darren's parents in the mail. Seeing as the weather in the south can be pretty weird when it comes to winter, it didn't get really cold until a few days before New Year's Eve. I could remember the newly frigid air paired with bumpy, unkempt country roads made for an uncomfortable ride to the house. Usually I don't drive with my brights on since I hate how other drivers always blind me with theirs, but the sheer darkness of the windy, narrow road made it a necessity this time. Anyways, the narrow road was surrounded on both sides by a dense tree line. So even with my brights, it was hard to see where exactly all the twists and turns were ahead. Driving on a particularly straight section of the road, my lights illuminated something ahead amongst the trees, something white against the darkness. As I neared, I could see it was the shape of a person standing all alone on the side of the road. They weren't moving or hiding, just standing completely still with their back to the trees. It was a woman, evidently wearing a white dress or gown of some sort, not at all appropriate for the cold. I didn't turn my brights off out of caution, so I couldn't really make out any specific details in the reflective glare of the white dress. As I passed her, I was thanking my lucky stars that she didn't step out in the middle of the road, causing me to stop. But then I started to wonder if maybe I should have stopped to see if she needed some help. Perhaps she was another guest trying to get to Darren's party. But it wasn't until I looked back in my mirror to see, in the red glare of my rear lights, that the woman had turned her body to follow me, still frozen in that one spot. It was definitely creepy, and in that moment I was glad I'm not the greatest example of a good Samaritan. No way was that a fellow party guest. We arrived at the party without any further incident around 8 p.m. parking in the gravel circle amongst the dozen or so other cars outside Darren's house. It was situated in a large clearing in the surrounding forest, just like all the other spaced houses in the neighborhood. The festivities went on until we had watched both the ball drop in New York as well as our own time zone's clock striking 12. After that, everyone slowly started to clear out. I stayed behind a bit to help clean up, as I usually did since I was one of the closer friends of Darren's family. By the time I left, my car was the only one left at the front of the house. When I got in and started it up, I got a low tire pressure light. My car is an older model, so it didn't give me exact details as to which tire was low or how many had the issue. Before I freaked out, I remembered that this sort of thing always happens with my tires when the weather first turns cold after a long warm period. I figured I'd be able to make it home okay, but before I drove off, I remembered that woman I had seen on my way there. Was she still out there somewhere? Had anyone else come across her? There was another way in the opposite direction I could use to get home to avoid that road, but it would add another 20 minutes or so to my commute, which I didn't want to do so late at night and with possible drunk drivers out and about. I figured I'd just suck it up and go back the way I came. I really wish I didn't. Not even a few minutes out on that same dark back road, I could feel something was different with my tires. I could hear it too. It sounded like bare metal scraping against the road. Slowly, my car came to a dead stop. I muttered, this was a different situation entirely. All that was going through my head was, did my tires fall off? Against my better judgment, I had to get out of the car to see what was wrong. Stupidly, I turned the engine off and shut the door. The car's lights turned off automatically, and I was plunged into the deep darkness of the surrounding forest. With my phone flashlight, I scanned each of my tires. My heart sank as each and every one of them had been ripped to shreds, as if they were torn apart by the claws of some... For almost less than 2 seconds, the person recording captures what seems to be someone or something standing in the corner of the room. Its sudden appearance is made even more creepy by the way it looks. Viewers have noted that it looks extremely thin and palish, but things become even more unsettling after seeing that the space where the figure was seen is now empty. Feeling immensely terrified, the woman behind the camera ends the video. Very little context is given on this footage, but with or without it, the clip is still quite creepy. At around 2 in the morning, a man named Daniel Palomino was walking alone inside a plaza when something completely unexpected happened. It was actually during a live stream when Daniel recorded this. Now, this is something that he often does during his free time. During late at night, Daniel walks alone while simultaneously live streaming on his phone. However, what happened on the night of September 28th of 2023 has scared him to his core. Like any other night, Daniel was live streaming to an audience who were suggesting places he should visit during his walk. One place that was recommended was an old plaza that's believed to be haunted. Although hesitant at first, Daniel heads over to the plaza after realizing how close he was to the place. But this was a big mistake. After exploring the strip mall for more than a few minutes, things started getting weird. Strangely, Daniel begins to smell a burning scent coming from somewhere in the plaza. He tries to find the source of the smell but gives up. Before suddenly, the scent goes away. Although pretty strange, this occurrence becomes a whole lot more unsettling. It gets a lot creepier after one of his viewers on his live stream tells him, not. According to the viewer, there used to be an old casino inside the plaza that caught fire and took many people's lives. Hearing about this left Daniel totally freaked. He just smelled a burning scent and thinks this might have been somehow connected to the fire incident that occurred years ago. Feeling spooked, Daniel immediately starts to head out, but on his way out, something in the distance makes him stop in his tracks. This is what he saw. Wait, guess this. Who? Key. Relentless, my lungs burned and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. But I didn't dare look back. We reached our cabin and slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. For a moment we just stood there, staring at each other, trying to catch our breath. Then we turned off the lights and peered out the window, expecting to see the man charging toward us. But the forest was empty. The only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. Colin grabbed his phone and called the authorities. It felt like an eternity before they arrived, but eventually we saw the flashing red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. 2 officers stepped out of their vehicle, their breath fogging up in the cold, as we hurried outside to meet them. We told them everything about the screams, the man tied up, the masked figure, and the guy who had chased us. They didn't seem entirely convinced, but they agreed to check out the old cabin. We led them back through the forest, our flashlights slicing through the shadows. When we reached the cabin, my stomach twisted. The place was empty. No light, no screaming, no signs of anyone. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the wind, and inside was nothing but an empty room with a dusty floor and a broken chair in the corner. The officers said they'd continue their search and told us to stay in our cabin for That night, we didn't sleep at all. I kept picturing the man in the mask, wondering if he was out there watching us too. Days later, the authorities called to let us know they had caught the men. They didn't give us many details, just that they had found both the masked man and the guy who had been tied up. The officer on the phone sounded uneasy, like there was more to the story he wasn't telling us. When I pressed him for answers, he simply said, "It's better if you don't." We left the cabin that same day, cutting our trip short. The forest no longer felt peaceful. It felt wrong, like it was hiding secrets we weren't meant to uncover. Even now, back at home, I can't shake the memory of that night. The screams, the masked man, the chase, it's all burned into my mind. Sometimes I wonder what happened in that cabin. Who were those men and why was one of them being tortured? The authorities never told us, and maybe it's better that way. But every so often when I'm lying awake at night, I think about that voice in the forest, low and cold, asking, "What are you doing?" Before we get into the next story,